Hello and welcome to our Life Sciences live session. I'm Naomi and I work here at the University of Lincoln, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you some academics who work in Lincoln School of Life Sciences tonight. So firstly, a big welcome to Paul. Hi Paul.
Hello Naomi, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
All good.
Good. So Paul is here to talk to us today about ecology, conservation, biology and zoology, and all the different study options we have for those subjects at Lincoln. So we've got a lot to get through today, so we're going to get straight on with it. And firstly, Paul, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do at the university and your subject area of interest?
Yeah, of course. So my name's Paul Eady. I'm actually a zoologist. But my main area of interest is behavioural ecology, and I've been an academic now for oh gosh, nearly 30 years, which is quite frightening. It's been I have to confess, it's a really exciting time to be a biologist at the moment, with the sort of advances that we're making in molecular biology in particular, and how these can be applied to the worlds of biology, zoology, ecology, and conservation. So the main thrust of my research is behavioural ecology, and this sort of sits rather nicely at the crossroads between animal behaviour, ecology, and evolutionary biology. So really, it's looking at the function of animal behaviour primarily. I'll illustrate it with an example, and much of my research is on insects actually, so I could be called an entomologist as well. So I'm interested in sort of some of the weirder things in biology. So there's a little fruit fly called Drosophila bifurca. We've probably heard of Drosophila melanogaster, which is the most common one. But Drosophila bifurca is a little sort of 2.5 millimeter long fly, and yet its sperm are nearly 6 centimeters long. So the sperm are some 20 times longer than the fly itself. And as a behavioural ecologist, as an evolutionary ecologist, I'm interested in why. Why on earth has this tiny fly got a sperm that's some 20 times longer than itself? Okay. So that's the kind of thing that really interests me. But actually, I'm a zoologist and I'm interested in almost anything out there in the world of animal behaviour. So I've worked on acoustic tracking of bream in the River Witham. So this was a really nice study with the Environment Agency. But I'm also interested in, for example, how wildlife disseminate antimicrobial resistant bacteria and antimicrobial resistant genes further afield. That's a brief introduction.
Yeah. So the next thing we were going to ask you is a bit about your journey. Do you think you can expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So obviously, as I started off by saying, I've been a lecturer for nearly 30 years. I've in between then I did a PhD and then some research positions as well. And when you get to sort of my kind of age, you start to think about, well, how did I get here, sort of thing. And I think it goes right the way back to my very quite early childhood. So when I'm sort of, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 kind of thing. And my mother's father, my grandfather, who I actually never met, was initially a butcher and then became a farmer. And so I grew up with a mother who worked in the butcher's shop. And then because of the farming connections, we used to get all sorts of things. We'd get pheasants, partridges, pigeons, rabbits. And they'd all come home whole, not neatly packaged like you get in Sainsbury's or Tesco's. And then my mum would process them, which is a fancy name for chopping them up. But basically, my mum would skin them or pluck them. And then to get all the insides out, basically you'd cut them open. And I remember from a very early age sitting next to my mum and she would, you know, tell me, oh, this is the heart, this is the lungs, here's the liver. Oh, let's look in the crop. Let's see what the animal was eating when it died and things like that. It all sounds a little bit gruesome, but I think you can understand that it kind of, you know, sets the scene for a career in zoology in many respects. So in a nutshell, that's kind of how I got to do it. But I guess as well, coming from sort of a farming family, I used to go and work on the farm in the summer holidays. And I was also became very in touch with the seasons. So of course, you know, you have seasons on a farm, but being sort of outdoor stock and also being of that sort of I guess sort of the baby boom generation post-war, my mum was a great forager, so I knew what mushrooms we could eat. I knew where we could go and find chestnuts, hazelnuts, walnuts. I knew where the cherry trees were in the local hedgerows, etc., etc. So I think the combination of chopping up dead things and living in this sort of rural existence, it was kind of almost fated that I become a behavioural ecologist, I think.
Yeah, that definitely seems to make sense. That's great. So can you tell us then a little bit about the degrees that students can study at Lincoln that cover these subject areas?
Well, yeah, of course. So everything I've just explained kind of fits really neatly into biology, zoology, ecology, and conservation. It's an element of all of those things. So it's very obvious to me that animals and plants are adapted to the environments in which they live. Okay, and so basically that's sort of the beginning. That's the essence of it. And so I kind of touched upon, you know, sort of tagging fish in the river with them, but it kind of shows that, you know, these sort of subjects are interconnected. And so basically, the Environment Agency came to us and asked us, you know, they were quite keen to review side channels because they cost money to maintain, etc. And so they came to us, and as a zoologist, but also interested in ecology and general biology as well, we did this acoustic tagging process whereby we basically showed that the bream used these side channels in the springtime. And we monitored them for about 3 years. And we basically came to the conclusion that the bream used these side channels as spawning grounds. And really interestingly for me, again as a zoologist, we found that the males set up leks. So basically the males would defend little patches of river and try and attract females to these patches. So really fascinating stuff. I think what's important, so when you go to university, whether you come to Lincoln or any other university, is that you go with your own set of ideas and interests. So I was very much interested in anatomy and physiology when I went to university. But when I got to university, I had some lectures from a chap called Tim Birkhead, who actually introduced me to the notion of behavioural ecology. And so I'd never heard of behavioural ecology before I'd gone to university. And so I think what I want to stress is that when you go to university, your eyes are going to be open to so many wonderful, interesting things about biology in general, but zoology and ecology that maybe you'd never even thought about. And that sort of sparks this interest, really. So, you know, my advice is go to university with an open mind, as it were. Yeah, no, you'll be surprised at what is out there in many respects. So yeah,
Yes.
it's lovely that you're going to be taught by a range of experts who will, like I say, introduce you to all sorts of weird and wonderful things about the biological world, basically, which encompasses, like I say, ecology, conservation, and biology.
Great, I think that's some really good advice, and it leads on nicely to if you can tell us a little bit about some exciting things that students can expect to study within these subject areas at the university.
Well, as I just try, you're going to be exposed to so many really interesting and amazing sort of topics and great experts in the field. So, you're going to cover topics as broad as the ears of orthopterans. These are sort of crickets and bush crickets. You may or may not know they have their ears in their front legs. So you'll learn about the anatomy and physiology of insect hearing, but then also you'll learn about tropical trees and how they're a really important carbon sink. Given that we're all trying to go sort of carbon neutral, and one way to do this obviously is to protect our forests as best we can. The breadth of topics that you'll get covered at Lincoln is actually quite astonishing. You'll be taught the fundamentals of anatomy, physiology, both in humans and in animals. At the end of the day, humans are just another animal in many, many respects. And you'll learn about adaptation. So how do these animals exist in, I don't know, sort of extreme environments, the Arctic, the Antarctic, deserts, the marine environment, this big salty environment. How do mammals that evolved on land manage to hold their breath for over an hour? So a sperm whale, when it dives, can hold its breath for over an hour. How does it do it? I can't hold my breath for that long. All of these things will be explored whilst you're at university. But also you'll cover a whole range of other things, such as microbiology, and basically sort of life at the microscopic scale is a completely different life to what we experience. So we think of water as some sort of, liquid that we just sort of brushes off clothes and things. If you're a microbe and you live in liquid, then it's a bit like you swimming the English Channel in treacle. It's a vastly different world. And these are the sorts of things that maybe, when you arrive, might sort of tweak your interest, as it were. At the heart of all of this is biodiversity at the end of the day. Biodiversity covers everything here. And it's, so we've all got a kind of a feeling as to what biodiversity is, but do we really know what biodiversity is? We sort of have this sense of what it is, but how do we measure it? Okay, that's really important. How's it generated? What processes have led to the astonishing biodiversity of life that we see around us? And importantly for obviously ecology and conservation, but actually for all of us, is how do we sort of conserve and protect that biodiversity? So you're going to learn a whole range of important concepts in biology. It ranges from molecules through to cells, through to organs, through to individuals, populations, communities, ecosystems. And one of the things you're going to realize is that all of these things are interconnected. And we even have sometimes, people saying, why am I learning about, chemical molecules? Well, at the end of the day, they're really important. Plants communicate to insects through chemicals. So pollinators, they communicate through chemicals. But a really interesting one is when a plant is being attacked by a caterpillar, for example. That's what it is. The caterpillar's eating the plant. The plant does not want to get eaten. It releases chemicals, and these chemicals attract parasitoid wasps, and these wasps then lay their eggs in the caterpillars and kill the caterpillars. I mean, how cool is that? It shows this wonderful breadth of topic that you're going to be exposed to.
Great. So I think something that is really important to students is employability. So have you got any examples of what opportunities these subjects open up to students, and maybe any career paths that your former students are now undertaking?
So as a scientist, you pick up a whole range of transferable skills. Now, as prospective students, you probably want to go to university to become a scientist. lots of our graduates go on to do science jobs. I'll get round to some of those in a moment, but actually you pick up loads of really good transferable skills. And I think one of the key, or two key transferable skills, is that you become very good at evaluating evidence. And you then have to communicate that evidence. And so you become both literate and numerate. You pick up really good literacy skills, you pick up really good numeracy skills. And that opens up a whole range of different jobs to you. However, as prospective biologists, ecologists, you're probably more interested in what have our graduates gone on to do. Well, our recent graduates have gone on to do things such as scientific journalism. So one of our recent graduates currently writes for the Mail Online. Scientific publishing is another option. So one of them goes and works for one of the big publishing houses down in London. But we've got scientific officers in the healthcare industry. So that's sort of hospitals, but also private healthcare providers. Scientific officers in the agri-food industry as well. So looking at plant health, for example, that kind of thing. And then we've got one of our graduates is now a trainer for the Dogs Trust. One is a deputy head of the primate enclosure at the Yorkshire Wildlife Park. A recent one is literally 2 weeks ago, he let me know he's now got a position as a researcher at Tropic Biosciences, which is a small company down in Norwich, and they do really cool stuff. They use sort of really high-tech gene editing technology to improve the tropical crops, such as coffee plants and bananas, for example. So a really nice combination of, using high-spec, top-of-the-range genetic techniques to improve the ability of people to grow crops and defend them against insects, for example, as well. So really interesting stuff. But then some of our students, so they're some of the kind of jobs people have gone into, and then other students get the research bug, which is kind of what I did, and they go on to do masters by research or even PhDs. And so I'm just off the top of my head, a couple of recent graduates have gone on to do PhDs. One's looking at the biology of carnivorous plants. So these are the plants that catch insects and then eat them. Really interesting stuff. And then another one, really topically, is looking at how insecticides affect the behavior of solitary bees. So again, really important stuff, but great stuff. And hopefully, these might become the lecturers of tomorrow, as it were.
Yes, definitely. Lots of different options there for students then. So I think we've got time for one last quick question. So can you just tell us maybe something that's unique about studying at Lincoln and why prospective students should choose Lincoln?
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, I think it kind of comes down to the breadth of the team at Lincoln. If you come into the School of Life Sciences, and Neil is going to talk more about the biomedical sciences later, and Anna's going to talk about the animal behaviour and welfare side of things. But they're all part of our team at the end of the day. And we just have such a breadth of knowledge and expertise and enthusiasm at the end of the day. So we've got experts in paleontology. So just recently, they've published a fascinating paper on how pterodactyls flew. So based on a collection of bones, effectively, they've sort of worked out the aerodynamics and the biomechanics of flight in pterodactyls. We've got entomologists who study the acoustic behavior of insects, so how they produce sounds, how they hear sounds. You might be interested to know that insects actually have ears. They can have them on their legs, they can have them on their head, they can have them on their antennae, they can have them on their abdomens, they can have them on the thorax. They got not all at the same time, but different species have got ears all over them. And this is really fascinating. So moths, there's a group called the eared moths, and they use these to listen into bats. So bats use echolocations. The moths pick up these echolocations and take evasive action. So really interesting stuff. We've got biomechanics, who look at the the strength of plant materials, the strength of nest materials used in birds' nests, but also, you know, using high-speed video, we can understand how little things like fleas and frog hoppers can leap enormous distances, way beyond what a sort of scaled up a human could do. We also have very relevant research. So it's well known that high temperatures damage male fertility more so than female fertility. And in a world of global warming, this is really serious. This could really limit animal populations. And so at Lincoln, we're doing some really fundamental research into the relationship between temperature and insect fertility. And in particular, we're looking at how animals evolve in response to this. So what are the evolutionary changes that go on inside the reproductive anatomy and physiology of insects to cope with these raised temperatures? So so you asked me what's unique about Lincoln. I think it's that breadth of knowledge going right across these different levels of biological complexity, from molecules through to populations and communities.
That's great. That's some really fascinating stuff, and it's great to hear about some of the research that we're doing at Lincoln as well. So thank you so much for that, Paul. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
That's okay. It's a pleasure.
Fab. I think that's all we've got time for today, unfortunately, on those subject areas, but we are now going to move on and introduce Neil. So goodbye, Paul.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
See you later. Thank you. So hi, Neil.
Hi there.
Welcome to tonight's session. So thank you for taking the time to talk to us. Neil is going to talk to us today about biomedical science, biochemistry and bioveterinary science, and all the different study options we have for those subject areas at Lincoln. So again, a lot to cover. So we'll get straight into the questions. And firstly, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your role at the university and your subject area of interest?
Sure. So my name's Neil Holden. I'm the Deputy Programme Leader for Biomedical Sciences. Interestingly, actually, I was a previous Deputy Programme Leader for the Bioveterinary Sciences as well. So I've done a little bit of both. I've got a background in virology. So viruses, I teach a lot on viruses. I'm also an expert in the areas of chronic lung diseases. So diseases like asthma and COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is what emphysema and chronic bronchitis are now known as. I also have a bit of background in pharmacology, so developing new drugs and how they get made and all those kind of things. And within the School of Life Sciences, I'm one of the student engagement leads. So that means I liaise with the students, I work closely with the student reps, and I look at, what's going well, what needs improving, and all those kind of things as well.
That's great. It sounds like you've got a lot of expertise in a lot of different areas. So we'll be excited to hear more of what you've got to say this evening. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today and your journey in all those different areas?
Yeah, absolutely. So it kind of starts off around this time of year, actually. It started off with the Christmas present. So when I was younger, I got a Christmas present, which was a book, which was called The Virus Hunters. And it's a biography of two epidemiologists who worked for the CDC in America. And they went over to Africa in the late 1970s when Ebola and HIV were first emerging. And it tells them how they tracked down the virus, how they isolated the virus, and all these kind of things. And that really led me to my undergraduate degree, which was actually specializing in virology. So I studied pure viruses for 3 years, which was absolutely fascinating. I absolutely loved it. During that time, I actually got the opportunity to go out and work in industry for a year. So I did a placement year, and I went and worked for a pharmaceutical company who were developing drugs for lung diseases. And I came back from that placement year, and then I finished off my undergraduate degree, and then I found a PhD position, which was actually in collaboration with the company that I'd spent a year working for. So, and on similar things to what I'd worked on my year out. So it seemed like tailor-made for me. So I did my PhD, and it was absolutely fantastic. One of the best things I've done. After my PhD, I actually got offered a job doing research out in Canada, in Calgary, right by the Rocky Mountains, hour and a half drive to the ski slopes to go in and see black bears in the country and all those kind of things. And I spent 6 years in Calgary in Canada, and I basically worked on how the drugs that people take when they have asthma and when they have these lung diseases, how they actually work. Because it's one of those interesting things that even though these drugs have been around for many, many years, we don't always understand the exact mechanisms that goes on inside cells that these drugs are actually having their effect through. So I spent 6 years in Canada, met my lovely wife out there, and then it came time. So when you've done a PhD, you spend a number of years doing what they call postdoctoral work, which is what I did in Canada. And that came to an end, and I had to start looking for my next step. And I actually got offered a position out in Sweden, in Gothenburg. And it was actually with AstraZeneca, who's at the moment obviously in the news a lot from developing one of the vaccines for the coronavirus. And I went out to Sweden for 3 years, worked in the pharmaceutical sort of side of things, worked on developing new drugs, both sort of the preclinical side of things, which is, you know, coming up with the idea of what we need to actually target a drug for, all the way through to some of the clinical side of things where they actually test drugs in patients. And then in 2014, I moved to Lincoln and started lecturing here in all those areas I've already pretty much talked about. So lung diseases, viruses, all those passions I've built up over the years.
Wow, what a varied journey. You've been lived in some great places there as well.
Yeah, all cold places. Canada, Sweden, you know, all places with lots of snow.
And now you're back to the UK. Cold, but no snow. Okay, so could you tell us a little bit about the degrees that we offer at Lincoln that cover those subject areas?
Absolutely. So, I mean, the first, which would be the Biomedical Science degree. This is actually an accredited degree, and it's accredited by the Institute for Biomedical Sciences. This is an important thing because if you want to go off and work in the NHS, for instance, in a biomedical laboratory, you need an accredited degree to actually work in those positions. Okay, and basically within biomedical science, we're looking really at the things like pathology of disease. So what's actually the underlying causes of disease? How we diagnose diseases? So what are the kind of tests that we do to actually find out what disease someone has, and how do we treat diseases? So coming up with how we treat them, how things work, how we get drugs into those patients, or how we come up with new treatment strategies and all those kind of things. So that's biomedical sciences. Bioveterinary sciences is basically in some ways similar. So they also look at diseases and sort of the pathologies and the underlying things like that. But they look at it from the perspective, sort of from the veterinary perspective. So looking at animals and those kind of things. And there's a bit more flexibility in the bioveterinary degree. And basically students can tailor it to their own interests. So there's certain streams within the bioveterinary degree which goes more towards the behavioural side of things, which, you know, we have our very specialist animal behaviour and welfare, which Anna's going to be talking about in the next session. But, you know, you can do bits and pieces of that behavioural side of things in bioveterinary, or go completely down sort of the more molecular route in sort of bioveterinary and look at more, again, drug development, microbiology within those sort of animal parts. Then we have biochemistry. So biochemistry is more looking at the intricacies of the underlying processes that goes on in cells that actually, underpins many of these sort of mechanisms that we talk about. So when we're talking about all these sort of molecular pathways and all these kind of things, it's actually the chemistry, the biological chemistry, which actually controls many of these processes. And biochemistry is really the study of that, of how these different signaling pathways and other molecules interact at the molecular level, and how they're controlled, and how we can actually then intercede and change some of those things.
That's great. Thank you for explaining those. Sounds like some great options for prospective students.
Yeah.
So thinking about those then and the future from that, obviously we've heard about what you went on to do after university, but what are some of the employability options that are opened up from these degrees to prospective students?
So obviously, as I've already mentioned, the accredited biomedical degree, it's a bit more of an applied subject. So that actually can directly lead into biomedical sciences within the NHS, and you can become an established biomedical scientist and doing all sorts of different things. So anytime you go onto the doctors and they've taken blood, or they've taken other sort of bits of tissue and those kind of things, they get sent off to a pathology lab, and it's actually the biomedical scientists that do the tests that the doctor requires to actually understand what the diagnosis is. But on top of that, I tend to find that our biomedical students, our bioveterinary students, and our biochemical students, they all tend to use their degrees as a platform of some kind of work within health, whether that's the healthcare system, so within things like physician's associate and all those kind of positions, which is, actually working with patients, but also things like pharmaceutical development, also looking at things, even within sort of the publishing side of things. So looking at, working with scientific journals and another kind of sort of, communication with the public, writing policies, actually coming up with, those leaflets, which are actually incredibly important into actually explaining to the general public sort of about diseases, about vaccines, and about those kind of things. So it's incredibly important that you have that underlying biological knowledge to explain things well. So they worked, within law, within patent law, and all those kind of things. So, I mean, the one I'd really, one that comes to mind immediately, we actually had one of our biomedical science students who graduated last year. Now, he actually spent a year, did a placement year within industry, and he actually worked for GlaxoSmithKline during that year. And then he went off, graduated from his biomedical science degree here, and now he's actually in a graduate scheme at AstraZeneca, working with a team of scientists from Cambridge University, coming up with new strategies for treating the coronavirus, which is obviously, in all of our minds right now in terms of those sort of side of things. So, it is incredibly varied. Now, of course, a number of our students do go on to study further degrees, and we've actually supported a number of students who've gone off to medical school and indeed veterinary schools. So these are sort of the graduate level medical schools and veterinary schools, as well as sort of the more academic degrees, so masters by research, and PhDs and things like that as well.
Fab, thank you. Lots of different options again, opening up for students there. So I think you've touched on this a little bit, but can you highlight any really exciting things that students might study while doing these degrees?
Yeah, and absolutely, it's a wide variety of subjects. So really, sort of, we go from everywhere from sort of anatomy and physiology. In fact, today I was teaching the anatomy of the respiratory system to our first year biomedical students, and we were talking lots about how the lung, the anatomy of the lung and how the lungs work, all the way through to microbiology, immunology, and all sorts of those real molecular kind of subjects. But all the way through, so within bioveterinary science, you can go from whole animal systems, so again, anatomy and physiology of animals, all the way through to some of the animal health and disease side of things, so looking at the microbiology, looking at their immune systems, which can be quite different from our own immune systems. And again, all the way up to things like behavior and even some of the legislation and things like that that controls, you know, institutions like zoos. So how do we make sure that animals are treated right where they're kept in captivity and all that side of things. So it's really interesting in terms of some of those sort of subject areas can be incredibly varied. Now, really the important thing here is the way that we've actually structured those modules. So what we do in the first year, we basically get a really strong foundation for all of our students, because we know all of our students have come from different backgrounds. We know some students have done A levels, some have done BTECs, and even within the A levels, they've done different subjects. So the whole point of the first year is to really give students that really strong foundation to actually build upon. And then the second year, we go into a bit more detail, a bit more depth. We start going into some of the subjects we may have touched on in the first year, but in a lot more detail. So for instance, you know, microbiology, we cover, you know, the basics of microbiology in the first year. In the second year, we have a whole entire modules, you know, really focusing on microbiology and, you know, all the different kinds of microbes, so bacteria, fungi, viruses, and all these kind of things, and really going into a lot more depth about them. And in third year, we start building upon those skills even further, start developing the critical thinking skills that a scientist really needs. So, you know, we really are training you to be scientists. So, you know, to actually starting to question things and come up with your own hypotheses and actually critiquing the science that's out there, because that's how we move forward in science, is basically building on what's already there. Okay, you know, I don't think that's right. How can I prove that? And those are some of the really essential skills in which we're sort of building into our graduates.
Great, that sounds like some really interesting stuff again. So I think we've got time for one more question tonight. So it'll be great to hear about some of the research that we're doing at the University of Lincoln at the moment.
Absolutely. So, I mean, the fantastic thing about Lincoln is the variety of academics that we've got here. So, you know, you can be taught biomedical science by someone who's actually worked in the biomedical science laboratories in the NHS. You can be taught pharmaceutical science by someone who's worked in the pharmaceutical industry and things like that. So we've got a real breadth of academics working here. So some of the research that's going on right now within those kind of fields, I mean, biomedical science, we've got a fantastic group of scientists within the diabetes field. So we have people who are working on ways in which, you know, transplants might be used to actually solve things like type 1 diabetes, where you've actually lost the ability to produce insulin. So can we put the cells from someone else into your body so that we can actually start again producing the insulin that your body can't? And all those kind of things. And the underlying science behind that is incredibly complicated. We have scientists working on some of the complications of diabetes. So things like end-stage kidney disease is a massive issue in diabetes. And we know diabetes, the incidence of diabetes is actually increasing. So some of these complications are becoming more and more prevalent. So things like end-stage kidney disease is, again, becoming more and more important within our healthcare system of actually understanding it and coming up with new ways in which we can treat it. We have a number of virologists within our department, so including myself, and we're looking at things like how coronavirus infections might actually be affecting the immune system in the long term. So we've heard in a bit about long COVID and all these kind of things. So studying some of the mechanisms that's actually going on in the immune system in people that are experiencing symptoms for long periods of time. We have Colin Butter here, who's actually the program lead for the Bioveterinary Science side of things. And he's one of the world's leading experts in influenza viruses and how they actually enter the cell. In terms of, you know, within animals and within, you know, humans as well. And it's absolutely, you know, amazing. In fact, I think he's been on TV quite a lot recently talking about the viruses and coronaviruses, things like that. So you might have actually come across him in various places. And all these other kind of things. So we have academics who work in cancer biology, looking at some of the molecular mechanisms of cancer and whether we can, you know, target these, you know, in terms of very particular kinds of cancer. And we have a number of microbiologists who are looking at different bacterial diseases and other diseases as well, and looking how, again, trying to come up with better treatments and those side of things.
That's great. So lots of exciting things happening. A very topical time for these areas as well, obviously.
Exactly.
So That's great. Thank you so much, Neil, for taking the time to talk to us tonight. It's been really interesting to find out more about all these different subject areas. Got to introduce Anna now, so unfortunately that's all we've got time for. So we'll say goodbye. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
And we'll say hello to Anna. Hi.
Hi, everybody.
Nice to see you this evening, Anna. So Anna is here to talk to us today about animal behaviour and welfare and the study options we have at Lincoln for these subject areas. So thank you for joining us tonight. Obviously, a lot to cover again, so we'll get straight into it. And firstly, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at the university and your subject area of interest?
Absolutely. So my name is Anna Wilkinson, and I'm a professor of animal cognition. And as the title suggests, I'm really interested in animal cognition. So I'm interested in how animals think, how they learn, how they remember, and how that impacts the decisions that they make in their environment.
That's great, thank you. And just a little bit more about you then. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are today and how you came to love animal behaviour and welfare?
Absolutely. Well, I've always loved animals. And when I was younger, I thought the only career you could have with animals was being a vet. And unfortunately, as well as loving animals, I'm also allergic to them. So that wasn't ideal for a career choice. So I wanted to try and explore how you could work with animals in a different way. And I'm really, really glad I did, because I realized that animals don't really like vets. I've worked in zoos where you can hear the vets here because the chimps are all screaming, yeah? Because they don't understand that you're trying to help them. And so what I realized I was really interested in was actually the behavior of animals. I wanted to understand why they did what they did and how they made the decisions that they did. And when I was doing my degree, you couldn't really study animal behavior as a topic itself. So I actually studied psychology, which is the study of behavior of humans and of non-human animals as well. And so I went to a university where they specialized in studying non-human animals within psychology. And then I went out to the rainforest after my degree, I went out to the rainforest to study primates in the field, which is what I'd always wanted to do. And I realized that actually, while it was super cool and I loved it, what I really, really enjoyed was actually working with the animals and doing manipulations to try and understand why they were behaving as they were doing. And so I came back and I did my PhD in bird cognition. And I did my PhD at the University of York. And then I went on to, after doing that, I also, while I was working in York, I was doing my PhD with birds, but I had a pet reptile, a pet tortoise called Moses. And I was in a lecture by one of the professors, and he was telling me about how rats learn to navigate around mazes. And I said to him, I said, well, you know, Moses could do that. And so we built my tortoise a maze. And actually, that's the foundation of my current career. So I'm interested in how reptiles in particular, I do work with other species too, navigate around their environment and make decisions. I then went to Vienna to work in the Department of Cognitive Biology. And I worked again on bird cognition. And then we started getting more reptiles, and I started doing more work with reptiles. And then I joined Lincoln in 2010 as a lecturer here. And I've been here ever since.
Wow, some really interesting stuff again there. Everybody this evening seems to have been all over the place. Canada, Vienna, great. So thinking about that then, what can you tell us about some exciting research that's going on at the moment at Lincoln?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Now, I have to decide where to start. So I'm going to be biased and start with some of my stuff. So I do, as I've said to you already, I do some research in reptile cognition. And we're doing some work at the moment, which I think is really exciting. So we're doing work to look at actually, so tortoises, red-footed tortoises, who are my study species that I do a lot of work with, they're also really important seed dispersers in the environment in which they live. And so actually they play a really key role in the ecosystem processes. And we started to look at this. I was collaborating with some ecologists, and we realized that actually when when ecologists look at sort of seed dispersal and this process, they always think the animals know absolutely nothing and they behave at random, or the animals know everything and they can remember everything they've ever done. And obviously, if you work in animal cognition, you realize that actually it's something in between that. So we've done some really exciting work looking at actually sort of the role that cognition plays and how an animal remembers things and learns about things plays on these really key ecosystem processes. And during that work, we've looked at, for example, we've looked to see whether tortoises are able to remember which a certain stimulus, so that's a coloured cue, is associated with a reward. And we've found they can do that, and that they can do that for their very favourite thing, which is mangoes in this case. But they can also remember that for 18 months. And that's really important, because you think that this is going to then alter the decisions they make, not just within a fruiting season, but across fruiting seasons. So it has a massive impact potentially on the plant. And so it's this is an area that I'm extremely excited about. And this is something which we do at Lincoln. And one of the real advantages for me of being at Lincoln is that I am working in a life science department. So I work with people from the whole array of life sciences. You've met Paul, you've met Neil, and it allows you to work in areas that you would never have worked in otherwise. And that's one of the things that I think is so exciting. I'll just tell you one other area of research that we're working on at Lincoln. Some colleagues and myself have a real interest in how animals perceive emotions, and in particular dogs. So we've done some research where we've looked at whether dogs are actually able to understand the emotions that we present. So we look at, we present something like a smiling face, and do they understand what type of voice potentially matches with that? Can they categorize that? And we found that they can. And now, of course, we're extending that. And at the moment, what we're finding is we're really looking at the sort of the change in circumstances dogs have experienced as a result of COVID-19. So we're looking to see how wearing masks, covering our face, actually impacts on their ability to perceive the emotions that we're displaying.
Great, all really interesting stuff and very topical again. Being a dog person myself, that's very interesting to me. Okay, so can you tell us then a little bit about the exciting things that students might learn while studying animal welfare and behaviour at Lincoln?
Absolutely. So the Animal Behaviour and Welfare degree really takes you into the science of understanding why animals behave in the way that they do, and how we can understand that to then promote their welfare better. And it's really important that you realise that this is a science degree. And so in the first year, there's all sorts of really important fundamental science that you need to know, which we then build on as you go throughout your degree, so that you have the full understanding of why animals behave in the way that they do and how we can help them. So as an example from some of the teaching that we do in one of my modules, which is actually animal cognition and welfare. So it covers broadly a lot of the things which may interest you, is we start by getting students to really think about how do you actually ask the question of animal cognition. So everyone likes to say, my dog's really clever, it does this. It's like, but how do you know it's doing that in the way a human's doing that? How can we ask these questions? So we teach students about how to ask these questions. And then we're really fortunate that we have very, very good relationship with the Lincolnshire Wildlife Park. And COVID permitting, they allow us to go and actually work directly with their animals and ask these cognitive questions that we've been learning about in class. So you get to design experiments, you get to think about how you ask these experiments, and then you get to actually go and do them with lemurs or tigers or parrots. And I think that is something which is really very, very special. So it's applying your scientific knowledge in a situation with the animals living at the zoo.
Wow, yeah, that's a great opportunity within that degree then. And the next question was actually going to be about what is unique about Lincoln. I think you might have covered it a little bit there, but is there anything else you want to add to that?
So I think that definitely is. We do have some great relations, and we do have these sorts of exciting opportunities. The other thing that I would definitely say is unique about Lincoln is that the people who will be lecturing you. So we have a really large group of people who work in behaviour and welfare here at Lincoln, and that's fantastic because we are all dying to teach you about it. And this is something which I think is really quite special, because often other universities might have just a few people working in the area, but we have the very large group. We do a lot of collaborative work where we work together. So my background is cognition, but I do a lot of work in welfare with my colleagues who are welfare experts. And we like to take the cutting edge work that we're doing and to tell our students about it. So one of the assignments that my third years get to do is we give them papers, scientific papers, which haven't been published yet. And they get to read this brand new research, and then their assignment is to write a short abstract on it. And an abstract is basically like a summary of everything that that paper contains. So we're giving you access to brand new work, and that we're allowing you to take that work and interpret it as to what it means. And I think that's something which is really exciting about what we do here.
Definitely. Okay, so again, you've touched on this a little bit, but practical elements to teaching. Can students undertake work placements as well while studying?
Yeah, so there we do run practicals within our modules, and they're a really, really great way to, as I've probably already said, to take what you're learning in class and to apply it, and you learn so much by doing that. So I've already told you the example from the Lincolnshire Wildlife Park. Another example that I cannot possibly not tell you about are the field courses that we go on. So between second year and third year, we run field courses, COVID permitting, to really amazing places. So the places which we've run in the past, we've taken students to South Africa, to Ecuador, to Finland, and I can tell you a little bit about Ecuador because I've been on that one many times. And what we do in Ecuador is we get dropped off at the bottom of a mountain in the Andes, and we walk up it, and we are living in a cloud forest for around 10 days. And for the first few days, we give students lectures, and we go out and we explore the forest, and we tell you about the flora and the fauna that's out there. And then you get the opportunity to design your own research question and actually ask a question about the environment that you're working at. And that might be about how the hummingbirds forage. It might be about the different plants at different elevations. And it's up to you as to what you want to do. And then you will get a supervisor for an academic, and you will work together to design the best way to look at the research question that interests you. And I think those opportunities are really fantastic, and I would really urge students to go if you possibly can.
Yeah, and it sounds like it gives students some flexibility as well, and to tailor things to their interests, which is always really great for students.
It is, and it's also a really great way to prepare for your dissertation, because you get this that you get to choose the area you're interested in, and within reason, I have to say that, and then you get to actually learn the research techniques which you'll then be applying within your dissertation, which is potentially really exciting. In terms of placements, you asked me about, Naomi. So we do have the opportunity for student placements, but students do need to be really proactive to go and seek those opportunities. So we've had a student who's gone off to Slovakia, and she's worked with a conservation research group out there. We have students who are working in an equine facility to understand more about the horses there. And we've had students who've gone on to big companies and worked in food nutrition. So there are potentially opportunities, and there are opportunities within different areas of behaviour and welfare as well.
That's great. Some great examples there as well. Thank you. So I think finally then, just moving on to thinking about the future and sort of where animal behaviour and welfare can take you. So what potential employability options open up to students after studying this degree?
Well, I think there are lots of different ones in lots of different fields. And I think, and as we've said before, this is a science degree. And so it gives you that base of science, which then can be used in a number of different avenues. So I was thinking about this afternoon, and I've just picked a few of our students to tell you about what they've gone on to do, to give you a little bit of an idea of the sort of spread of work. So one of our students, Sophie, she works for a charity called Canine Partners, and this is a wonderful charity where people who have disabilities, they have support dogs who support them both emotionally, but also these dogs are trained to do things to help that person. So, for example, they train dogs to get money out of the bank. They train dogs to load washing machines. They train, and obviously, you have to have a really, really strong understanding of the science which underlies behavior in order to actually be able to train those dogs in a welfare friendly way to actually support the human. And so that's just one of the examples. We have a student called Dan, who is now working at the Yorkshire Wildlife Park, and I think he's the deputy head of the primates. So again, if you have an interest in the more zoo side, we've had students who go into that area. We have many students, in fact, who work at the Dogs Trust. One of our students, Hannah, she works at training people how to support. She supports trainers for training their dogs and to support the dog school which runs there. So again, that's really good. So she's taken that understanding of dog behavior and she then translates that for the people who train the dogs.
That's great. Again, some great examples there, and it's great to see some of the employability options that open up to students and what former students have done. So thank you so much for that, Anna. I think we've come to the end there. So again, that's great. I must thank Paul and Neil again for joining us earlier today and telling us about those other subject areas within the School of Life Science at Lincoln. But again, thank you to you, Anna. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. And that's it for this evening. Thank you to everyone that's been watching.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.